Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I really appreciate it. I'm here to share my lived experience of having and losing a child to epilepsy. I speak to you today in memory of my son Nikias and all the other children that I've learnt about who have passed from sudden unexplained death in epilepsy, otherwise known as SUDEP. SUDEP is the number one cause of death of people who have epilepsy. My son died suddenly, unexpectedly and tragically in April 2021. He was 17 in Year 12, had a part-time job at Coles, had a great group of friends. He was hard-working, kind, thoughtful and had a great sense of humour. He was the most wonderful child or son that I could ever have wished for. He was diagnosed as having epilepsy at age 3 after 18 months of febrile convulsions and multiple hospitalisations. We were told there may be a good chance he would outgrow the condition. He was seizures-free between 10 and 12, and we were hopeful that this had happened. Unfortunately, when he started high school and started maturing, he started to have involuntary jerking movements of a morning. This would result in his arms flailing involuntarily. His paediatrician assured us it would not be epilepsy. However, I was insistent that something was not right. Following an ECG and another test, we met with an neurologist and his paediatrician. At the meeting, we were informed that Nikias did indeed have epilepsy. He had now juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. We were told it was important to keep the myoclonic epilepsy under control with medication, as it could develop into grand mal or tonic-clonic seizures, but we weren't told why this was important to do. The tests also revealed that Nick had epilepsy in part of his brain, that it was always there and always would be. At this meeting, we were told that we would need to be careful of the following: not allow him to do skydiving or scuba diving, to be careful around water and make sure he was supervised, to ensure he got enough sleep, that he took his medications and that he didn't spend too much time on screens. Nikias, as we were, was very diligent in ensuring he followed the advice of his doctors. Understandably, we were all somewhat disappointed to learn that he would have epilepsy for the rest of his life. As a family, we treated epilepsy as a condition that would require some modifications to Nick's life, but we wouldn't allow him to use it as an excuse, and he wouldn't allow it to interfere with his life and what he wanted to do. Nick was happy. He lived a full and happy life. We didn't know that it could kill him. On Sunday, April 11, 2021, our day began like most Sundays. My husband, Nick, and I watched a Liverpool football club replay as a family. We spent time hanging out together in the lounge and then went about our day. Later in the afternoon, my husband went outside to mow the lawns. I was mopping floors. Nick was shooting basketball hoops. Once he'd finished shooting hoops, he went into the shed to work out in our home gym. Half an hour later, my husband came running into the house screaming at me to get help. He'd found Nick collapsed in the gym and thought he was dead. 3 days later in ICU, Nick was declared brain dead. On April 16, we said goodbye. Nick's passing left us with one question: what happened? Initially in the hospital, a doctor told us he may have collapsed due to a lack of or an excess of fluid intake, that maybe he had suffered a cardiac arrest. Then we were told he had tumours in his heart. Following an autopsy, we were told there were no tumours, so there was more confusion. What had happened to our Nick? With no answers, I started questioning doctors about what had caused him to have cardiac arrest. Could something have happened to his heart? Why does a healthy boy just collapse and die? No one could tell me what had happened to Nick. I then started looking at what may cause a perfectly healthy 17-year-old to suddenly die. I will point out that I have no training in medical history, no health background. My training is in education and dealing with behaviour. So this was all new to me and something that I felt way out of my depth with. I looked into heart conditions, genetic conditions and any possible reason to explain his sudden death. After his passing, my husband, 13-year-old daughter and I were told to see cardiologists, and they recommended that we undergo a series of heart tests. The cardiologist requested all of Nick's medical records from the ambulance, the ICU and his doctors. When we met with the cardiologist, he told us that there was nothing wrong with Nick's heart. His heart had not stopped first, his breathing had. A lack of oxygen had then led to his cardiac arrest. So now I had a new question. What makes a 17-year-old healthy boy stop breathing? This is when I started looking into what people with epilepsy die from. This is when I first learnt about SUDEP. From what I initially learned, it appeared that SUDEP was something that people with epilepsy passed from in their sleep. SUDEP as his cause of death still didn't make sense. Nick was running on the treadmill when he collapsed. I had a new question. Do people with epilepsy just suddenly die from SUDEP? At this stage, I was in a few SUDEP Facebook groups I had found. I decided to post on these groups and ask if anyone else had lost a loved one in a similar way that we had lost Nick. Sadly, the answer was yes. One lady told me her husband was carrying a breakfast tray outside and he collapsed and died. Another young boy in his teens was playing online with his friends. He got up to get a snack from the fridge. His mother came home and found that he'd collapsed and died in the fridge, in front of the fridge. Another example is a woman whose son was sitting at the table reading and he just died. With this information, we went back and saw Nick's neurologist. We told him what we knew. He told us that there is an entity called SUDEP and this appeared to have been what Nick had passed from. This was the first time a medical professional had ever mentioned SUDEP. We had been dealing with this epilepsy since Nick was 18 months. This was the first time these words had ever been mentioned. At all the hospitalisations throughout Nick's life, SUDEP was never mentioned. At no appointment with a GP, a paediatrician, a neurologist or an epileptologist was SUDEP ever mentioned. Not once had any medical professional over those many, many years led us to believe that epilepsy could kill Nick. Understandably, Nick's death has left me devastated. I question myself as a parent. I blame myself for not knowing about SUDEP. I question the decisions I have made regarding his care, the medications he took, the doctors he saw. I am still filled with guilt that I have not done everything I could to protect him. I felt alone and angry, and I feel that I have let him down. Following Nick's death, I established a Facebook group for Australia titled SUDEP Support Australia. It is a closed group that provides support for parents and those who have lost a loved one to SUDEP. Losing my son and the stories parents have shared with me about the loss of their children has led me to believe that key changes must occur in the treatment of people with epilepsy to ensure that we reduce the numbers of deaths from SUDEP and work towards finding a cure. The changes needed are: the people with epilepsy and their carers need to be informed of what SUDEP is. It may be uncomfortable for people to hear, and it might be something doctors feel they don't need to disclose. But I can assure you that conversations about the sudden death of your child and funeral arrangements are much worse. People with epilepsy deserve to be informed of the risks of their disease in the same way people with heart disease and cancer are made aware. Over and over again, I am told by members of the Facebook group that they had not heard of SUDEP until their child had passed from it. Learning about SUDEP after your child has passed is too late. That those who are at high risk of SUDEP are informed of this by their treating physician so they can ensure they do whatever they can to prevent SUDEP. Following my son's death, I learnt, according to a checklist by SUDEP Action UK, that he was what was considered at high risk of SUDEP. Had we known this, we may have made different decisions regarding his care and medications. Unfortunately, this choice was taken out of our hands due to a lack of information from his treating physicians. I also believe the people with epilepsy should be informed of the preventative measures they can implement that may reduce their likelihood of SUDEP. SUDEP Action UK completed research where they informed those with epilepsy in a particular area in the UK about SUDEP and the preventative measures that they could use. The study found that the number of deaths from SUDEP in that area decreased as a result of this strategy. We need to inform people how to reduce their risk of death from SUDEP when such a strategy has already been proven effective. In Australia, we are continually informed of how to prevent skin cancer, how to prevent diabetes, heart disease and sudden infant death in children. Why not SUDEP? Our son's death certificate states epilepsy as a cause of death. It does not state SUDEP. We need to ensure that pathologists and coroners are upskilled so that they can identify a death caused by SUDEP, so that we can have an accurate numbers on the number of people who die from SUDEP in Australia. Currently, we do not. Australia needs a federal organisation that is responsible for a national SUDEP approach. Currently, we have an ad hoc approach with different organisations doing different small bits and pieces. But because SUDEP's not attractive, it's not sexy, people don't want to talk about it, it's hidden on pages, you can't easily access the information. We need a national body that puts it at the forefront and pushes it as an advocate. This organisation would be responsible for research into SUDEP and preventative strategies, maintaining a national data bank on the number of people who have passed from SUDEP, the dissemination of information about SUDEP and preventative strategies to all medical professionals, the upskilling of GPs, neurologists and medical professionals about SUDEP, the upskilling of coroners and pathologists, providing information to the public about epilepsy and the fact that it is a serious disease and that it can kill. We need to raise the profile of SUDEP within Australia so it becomes known and discussed in the same way that cancer, MND and MS are. We need support for parents and loved ones who have lost someone to SUDEP. My hope in speaking today is that the Senate committee will agree with and recommend the recommendations that I put forth, as they can save lives. It's been 5 years since Nick passed. We live each day missing him, wondering what he would be doing, thinking of what his life would be like. His death has left an indescribable chasm in our lives that will never be filled. Our loss and pain are beyond comprehension. It's unimaginable. I thank you for allowing me to speak today. My hope is that with this committee's help, less families will have to experience what we have. Thank you.